In the last episode, we considered the very first of the 10 commandments. I am the Lord your God. You shall not have strange gods before me. And you may recall that in this first commandment, as it was initially given to Moses at Mount Sinai, God spoke to Moses prohibiting images to be made, whether from the sky above or earth below or waters beneath the earth. We as Catholics, as you can see behind me in the background, are quite fond of sacred art and sacred images, believing that these help us in our faith in God and our communing with Him in prayer. How is it that we do not break this first commandment through such things as statues, the use of relics, or even the honoring of the saints? Let's take a look at these realities and see how they are not hindrances, but truly aids to us in loving the Lord our God with all our being. Throughout the history of the Church, our heritage of sacred art is quite beautiful and quite diverse, given the way of artists, given the talents that they have, and given the devotion of the people. Yes, there have been times in church history where sacred art was frowned upon. The times of the Middle Ages and the iconoclasm, as it is called, where people began to reject the sacred arts as though it were a breaking of the very first commandment. But most often, we have seen sacred art not as a hindrance to the love of God, but truly an aid to our capacity to love Him rightly. And it is here that we want to focus this episode. How is it that we in the Catholic Church can justify our use of art, our use of such things as the relics of saints, and of course the very devotion that we give to the saints themselves as a means of right religion? In truth, it all goes back to the very reality of God Himself taking on our human nature. Of course, the God of the Old Testament is one who is purely spiritual and as yet fully revealed. It is only in taking on our human flesh that God fully reveals Himself, and realize this very act of taking on our humanity, of taking on limitation, of taking on a visible nature to His truly and properly invisible nature. God is, in a real way, allowing us to communicate with Him through what is created, through what is visible and perceptible. In the case of Jesus, He is no mere creature. He is begotten of the Father, as we would say, and therefore He is fully God. But having taken on our humanity and its limitations and its appearance, the truth is God is willing to communicate Himself to us in a manner of a creature, in a manner by which you and I can all the more have access to He who is infinite and invisible. And it's His gift to us that He comes to us in this way. It's not a matter of us trying to create something to conjure up God, let's say, or to try to find a pathway or access to Him. No, this is His gift. This is His coming down to us. And it is here that we find the very fundamental truth of where we have justification of seeking God in a way that sacred art, images, material things are truly an aid to us and not a hindrance. But it's very important that we are clear on how this works. Once again, it's a matter of what God has done for us and not what we try to do to seek God through our own devices, as we can call them. And so it is. Sacred art, the relics of saints, devotion to saints themselves, these are gifts from God. practically speaking, what does this really look like then? Let's consider the saints, first of all. That when we have devotion to saints, we are not undermining a relationship with God. We are asking that saint to help us. We are, yes, the terminology is praying to the saints, but it might be better said to say that we are praying through the saints, that we are asking them to intercede on our behalf. But we don't want to separate the saints from us to a point where they are up here and we're down here, and there's this chasm between us. We want to think of the saints as being like us, human beings that they are, sinful that they were, having repented of sin, let's say, having grown in right holiness, having lived this first commandment to the full after receiving well the grace of God. They are very much with us. They are not separated from us. And so we can speak to the saints the way we speak to one another. And it is here that we have a good and right explanation of what it means to pray to the saints, that we are simply asking them to pray on our behalf, just like you and I would ask one another to pray. And just as we come together in groups to pray together, whether we are formally speaking, worshiping, and celebrating the liturgy of the church, or simply coming together for devotional prayer and private prayer, though as a group, things like the rosary, things like other types of intercessory prayer that are well-founded in the life of the church, where we come together as a group and pray for a common purpose or intention or circumstance. These are all ways that we already are helping one another, and the saints, for their part, are simply those that we can ask to be part of this same prayer process, but with a key difference, that whereas we remain limited by our earthliness, by our susceptibility to sin and distraction and whatever takes us away from a more perfect love of God, the saints are caught up in that perfect love of God, and by asking them to help us, we are incorporating them into this act of prayer in such a way that they can pray to God without any limitation or any separation or any type of distraction getting in the way. They are able to go to Him fully and purely. And so we want to ask their help in approaching the Lord, especially the Virgin Mary, since this is a particular role as our Heavenly Mother that has been gifted to her, to not be afraid to ask her to pray on our behalf. But what about these relics of the saints? Acknowledging that there are relics that are parts of the body of the saint, let's say some of their hair that has been preserved through time, or, as is often the case with the martyrs, we have pieces of bone that have been rightly kept and guarded and are able to be rightly used in, say, the dedication of new altars in the church, such that those who gave themselves on behalf of Christ are enshrined, and thus uniting us with the whole church, with the martyrs, with people everywhere in the history of the church. The reality is, these first-class relics, as these parts of the body are called, they truly give to us an opportunity to recognize the closeness of the saints, that they are, yes, very much present with us, and that they are once again aiding us in interceding. But then there are the second-class relics, the, shall we say, vessels that the saints used, or the clothing that they wore, things that were earthly in their nature, but part of what this particular saint used or lived within, so as to be drawn into their holiness of life and onto sainthood. And here again, we have elements that are for us to truly venerate, as the word would go, not because we're worshiping them, but they are aiding us in being close to that saint who is close and truly perfectly united to God, and aiding us to look to God with their help. Then we have the whole of sacred art and architecture, such things as statues, the crucifix, all of the various works that we use of art. These realities, they for their part are not worshipped as though this is Mary herself. No, this is a representation of Mary. This is not Mary of Nazareth. She's in heaven. This reminds me of Mary of Nazareth, this image being as she appeared to the children at Fatima in the early 20th century. The reality is that to look upon a statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary or Saint Teresa Lisieux, or to look upon a crucifix, we are seeing through these onto what they represent. Jesus Christ crucified and victorious over sin and death. Our Blessed Mother, who now reigns in heaven. Saint Teresa Lisieux, the little flower whose vocation, as she discovered, is love in the heart of the church. We can ask them to pray by being reminded to them and realize that there is a very beautiful and perfect analogy here. The fact that you and I, we like to have portraits of those from our own family, those whom we love, within our homes. Now, when we look at the portrait, we are looking at paper and ink, are we not? But that image helps us to remember the person, helps us to acknowledge our love for the person, our sentiment towards them. And let's say they are in their real life, maybe hundreds or thousands of miles away from us at this time, are undergoing a certain trial, or for that matter, experiencing a new joy from a new opportunity, let's say. And we look upon that picture. Of course, we're not looking at them, we're looking at an image of them. But that picture is a window through which we can remember them. We can rejoice with them. We can share in their sufferings with them. We can pray for them. And so it is that these images, these relics, our devotion to the saints, these do not detract from our keeping God first. They are very much at the heart of our religiosity, not because they are our religiosity, but they help us as windows, as portals, we might say, to worship He who is the true God. And once more, all of this became true and right because of the very fact that God Himself willed to take on our humanity, that in the incarnation of Jesus Christ, He Himself comes down to us so that through a visible and appearing as a one who is a creature, He Himself can take us to Himself. And so it is that we want to rightly see relics of the saints, that we want to see images of art. They are doorways that we look through and thus truly can help us to see God in all moments of our life, thus loving the Lord with our whole being and never having strange gods before Him. May God bless you.